Hey, I thought I'd do a quick overview and mini review for Bladed Fury. Now, I am at the end of the game, and you'll hear the reason why I didn't want to wait until I finished the game to make this. The game is actually quite good. I think it has some pretty major issues. The art style is nice. The character is relatively responsive. It's definitely not as responsive as they were saying on their in a little post they made on the Steam page for it. There's definitely some problems with the attacks, not being able to cancel them properly and stuff like that, but the game is pretty fun. It doesn't really start to overstay its welcome until the end. At the point of the game I'm at right now, you'll actually see the problem firsthand, most likely. But before we get there, I'm gonna go ahead and go over the moveset. Now, you have a pretty small moveset in this game. Most of the moves are useful. It's mostly just the over-reliance on hyper armor and enemies that don't stagger or juggle that really makes things get old. Luckily, the game is not very long. I've only been playing for about an hour and a half. This is the final dungeon. There's like a boss rush and the final boss, and that's it. So you have two attack buttons. You have the sword button. Pretty standard, stylish action game fare. You have an S string, you have a launcher, you have an air combo. The thing that's unique about this game is you have an OTG launcher, which I think is awesome. However, due to the way that the game's designed, it's very little more than a gimmick, unfortunately. And you have the big sword. It's got a 3-hit combo. This actually reflects projectiles. You have this charge slash thing. And when you have this maxed out, it breaks super armor. I probably should have upgraded with that, but this game's kind of weird. Like, you have all these upgrades and stuff, but there's not really a way to farm for them. And I don't think there's a New Game Plus either, so in retrospect, I probably should have taken this off and gotten this. So now the end of the game is going to be far more difficult because it takes forever to break their armor. You can see how small the moveset is here. I think it's definitely one of the things that's disappointing about this game. The moves that are in the game have a use, but it does get kind of stale, even though the game is short. There's just not really a whole lot of options for your character. Now you have a dash, pretty standard fare, iframes. What's kind of unique is that you can upgrade to use it twice. And then you have the Soul Sliver mechanic. Now, these are basically just active abilities that you can use. So, this guy summons a bunch of arrows. If you ever played Wong Zhong in a modern Dynasty Warriors game, it's pretty much the same attack. You can see him do it right there. And then the Spider Princess or whatever slows down the movement speed. This is actually really useful on the bosses and the hyper armored enemies because it makes it a little bit easier to break their guards. And then this character heals you, and this is just basically a giant laser cannon. Looks pretty cool. And this guy is like a smart bomb. And then this one is a kind of a crowd control attack. Now these kind of are interesting, but to be honest with you, I would definitely trade these for more moves. A lot of times it feels like you can't really break the guards effectively. Really, the only way that you can break the guards safely is to do the Shadow Strike. But the problem is that the swords do the twin swords do almost no damage to their guard meters. So ideally, you would want to use this. You can see how much damage that does, and if you upgrade it, which I foolishly didn't do that. I got more heals instead. It makes it really hard to break their guards, and what makes it worse is that you can see how long it takes to guard cancel. You have to sit through a lot of active frames before she will actually pull the shield out. So while you're doing this, which is basically one of the only moves you have that's effective to actually break their guards, you have quite a lot of frames before you can actually put the shield up. And that can really throw off your timing. So normally in games that have defense mechanics like just guards or real release type mechanics, which is basically what this is, just without the anger meter, normally the character will be more responsive and they'll guard right away regardless of where they are in the attack. Kind of like how Dynasty Warriors 9 is. If you have the wind fire wheels, you can jump and guard out of everything. But here, you have to wait through a lot. You also can't block in the air either, so you would think that maybe, like a lot of other character action games. Normally you do stuff like this, kind of weave around the enemy and try to do damage that way and try to break their guard meter. You can't do that because you can't guard. There's no guarding or countering in the air at all, so a lot of this stuff is really unsafe, and since, like I said, since you don't really have that many moves to begin with, you don't really have a lot of other options. The meta is pretty much just abusing the sword as much as possible, but even that is not really as safe as it should be. That's basically the gist of the mechanics. I mean, what is there works. It's just the character needs to be more responsive, and there should definitely be a little bit less reliance on hyper-armored enemies. Likewise, the bosses cannot be staggered at all, so once again, you know, your aerial attacks, especially on the humanoid bosses, are basically pointless. You can't really use them safely. The only thing that you can really do safely is you can dash out of the way. And here's some of the combos that are possible on the mooks. Unfortunately, the game's not really balanced in a way where you can do any of that fun stuff. So you're gonna see it right here. You're gonna see how little damage I do. See, like, these guys in particular, I don't find them to be well designed because you can't really do much of anything to them safely. You can see how frustrating this can get. Like, you can't do any damage to them at all while they're in armor. It's not like other games where it just gives them the ability to withstand attacks without being staggered. Basically, it's like a guard meter bar, basically. You can't really attack them at all. You can see how frustrating that is. Now, ideally, I have to go back and refill everything at the save point because that took so much of my resources. It's kind of weird. Like, you can jump cancel pretty quickly, but guarding is just, it takes forever to come out. And due to the small moveset, this is really the only reliable way I've found to break their guards, aside from the countering. And like most action games, it's going to take a really long time before you develop the muscle memory to be able to counter everything. So I feel that the options for actually dealing with all those hyper-armored enemies should be a lot more robust. So I think in the next room there's going to be a boss. I watched someone else who got a review key play through this. So this is not an entirely blind playthrough. I did have a bunch of information before I got in. He got his key a couple days before I did, so... Now, they have said that they want to improve this game. I'm sure that once the game comes out in a few hours, there will be more people talking about these issues as well. I definitely think it is pretty punishing how you can't, like, reset your upgrades or anything. Like, right now, if I had that ability to make that counter-attack break their armor, this would probably be a lot more bearable, but since I didn't upgrade in that way, I'm going to have to wait until, you know, I get enough points to do it again. I'm still about, like, 2,700 away. You know, making these kinds of games is hard. I don't really think they did any kind of focus testing or anything, so hopefully there will be other people in the community that will give them advice. You can already see how annoying these enemies are, because basically this whole time you're kind of just withstanding their attacks. You can't, like, actually damage them. Fell down. The end of this game does feel like it's padded out a little bit. They start kind of introducing some rudimentary platforming and stuff like that. It is very Muramasa inspired, but it doesn't really have the backtracking, which is nice. Muramasa, as good of a game as it was very repetitive. There wasn't really a whole lot to it. You spent a lot of time going through the same content over and over. You know, even the same backgrounds, the same enemies. There's like very little variety. You know, here they pretty much trimmed the fat, so to speak. You pretty much can just go through this game linearly without a whole lot of like, you know, filler and stuff like that. I think making the bosses and the hyper-armored enemies more satisfying to fight should be their top priority. I don't really enjoy fighting the bosses in this because there's not really a whole lot of ways to fight them. The best possible way that you can fight them is to just keep doing the counter, which is fun. I've always liked counter mechanics in games, but I feel like, especially if they want this to be more accessible, there should be other ways to damage the enemies reliably as well. See, like right there, I wanted to counter, but because the sword takes so long to actually let you cancel out of it, it didn't work. So this is where the game starts to just come down at a real snail's pace because you can't really do any damage to them while they're not guard broken. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and stop there. That's basically the gist of the game. I uploaded some bosses earlier, so I don't really feel too inclined to get to that point. I think the game has a good foundation. I think the moveset needs to be improved. You should be able to do things like guard and counter in the air. That would make the aerial moveset actually have some use on the bosses. really only things you can do on the bosses and the hyper-armored enemies for the most part is to just do your sword string, because that's like the only thing that does any damage, and the twin swords are far more aerial oriented, and since you can't guard or guard cancel or counter in the air, it definitely limits your options. I think they need to make the existing moveset better, maybe reduce how much hyper armor there is. You know, maybe if you break the guard once, it just doesn't come back, or maybe drastically reduce the speed at which it recovers. That would speed up the game a lot. You pretty much have to do like optimal combos on the guard broken enemies, otherwise the whole cycle repeats again and the game slows to a crawl. At the beginning they're very lax with the hyper armored enemies, but towards the end of the game you get like almost nothing but them, and I think there's only like one, the big, like, I don't know, karate guy that does the counter punches. Like, he will actually like allow you to juggle him, but everybody else doesn't, so it gets pretty stale. You know, normally when games go overboard with the hyper armored enemies, the character has enough options to deal with it. Here, your option is pretty much either to use the big sword or counter, and since the sword has a really late cancel window, you can't really rely on that as much as you'd like. Anyway, that's it. I'll probably going to send this to them, and if they make any improvements, I'll let you guys know. If I get to the final boss, I'll probably upload a video as well, but for now, I'm just going to go with this. I think I'll enjoy this game more once it has more content. I don't think there's a new game plus or anything. There's only a hard mode and a challenge mode, and I don't really know if I'd care for the challenge mode when a big chunk of the enemies just aren't particularly fun to fight. So if they make some changes and adjustments, I'll definitely let you guys know. Thanks for watching. Peace.